To check out all our products, go to musicnomadcare.com. Hey, it's Rand with Music Nomad. This video is designed to show you how to set up your guitar using Music Nomad's Keep It Simple setup method. The KISS process uses our precision gauges and tools combined with step-by-step general guidelines anybody can follow and set up their guitar to play and sound great. To get the job done right, you will need our 6-piece precision gauge set that includes a truss rod gauge and pick capo, string action gauge, radius gauge set, nut height gauge, and a 24-page instructional booklet. All of these uniquely designed to make the process much easier and precise than other gauges out there. The 3 Music Nomad tool sets are a 26-piece Guitar Tech screwdriver and wrench set, 11-piece truss rod wrench set, and a diamond-coated nut file set. With these 4 kits, you are able to set up most all guitar and basses out there. Before you get started on your setup, there are some pre-setup steps you should do. Remove all your strings with the Music Nomad grip cutter. With the strings now off, and with the Music Nomad radius gauge, measure and make a note of the fretboard radius, as you will need this info when you measure the string radius in the setup process. Tighten all screws, including the tuning machine bushings, with Music Nomad's Guitar Tech tool set. Polish your frets with Music Nomad's Fine Fret Polish. Clean and condition the fretboard with Music Nomad's F1 oil. Clean the body and neck with Music Nomad cleaners. Finally, put new strings on with Music Nomad's grip winder. Okay, now you're ready to start the setup, featuring our talented guest guitar tech who will lead you through the process. Have fun.
With the goal of making setups accessible to everyone, my collaboration with Music Nomad has created a simple setup process to help you make your guitar play and sound great. So let's get started. So having Rand explain to you the pre-setup process, you've gone through the process of getting a fresh set of strings on your guitar, giving it the Music Nomad spa treatment, getting it cleaned up, having polished your frets, getting your fretboard oiled, and you have your guitar fully ready to move into the setup. Having a fresh set of strings on the guitar is really important. As a guitar string ages and it gets dead skin and build up on it, the intonation can drift, and you will want to intonate and set up a guitar with a fresh set of strings so that every time you put on a new set, your guitar is still dialed in and ready for that set of strings. So the setup process that we'll use on this guitar would be applicable to any Archtop guitar with a floating bridge with a wooden top, Gibson L-5, maybe you have a Benedetto, maybe you're lucky enough to have a D'Angelico, something like that that would use the same setup process. Some floating bridge jazz guitars do not have a wooden top with fixed intonation. Sometimes they'll have a tune-o-matic on top. So you would set your gross intonation with bridge placement, but then you would use the intonation process for an individually adjustable saddle bridge to set your intonation. And this setup process would also be used on a Gretsch with a bar bridge that does not have separate intonation points. So any Synchromatic or any of those that have the floating bridge with the bar, this would also work for that. So the flow that we will use on this guitar setup today is we will start with our neck relief. We'll measure our neck relief and set our neck relief. Then we'll move down to this wooden adjustable floating bridge, and we're going to set our bridge radius first using our radius gauge and nut files. Then we'll set our action height using the thumb wheels underneath the bridge top to set our action where we want it. We'll measure our nut height and cut our nut slots to the correct height. Then we will intonate our bridge and set our pickup heights. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure our neck relief. Now, neck relief is the amount of curvature in the neck. If you imagined with the guitar laying like this, if the neck was really curved like a hammock, it would have a lot of relief. If it was dead flat, where you put a straight edge on the frets and it touches all of them, that would have no relief. And if it was bent backwards, so a straight edge would rock on the fretboard, that would be called back bow. Now, the reason that a guitar needs relief is that when you pluck the string, it oscillates in an oval pattern. It's fixed at the nut and the bridge, and the middle of the string oscillates in the largest arc of any other part of the string. So by putting a little bit of relief in the neck, you create a pocket or create space for that string to oscillate without hitting the frets. If your neck is too straight, you have to raise the action at the bridge in order to allow the string to oscillate without hitting the frets. If you have too much relief, then the open note plays cleanly, but you can get buzzing in the middle of the neck. So in order to measure my neck relief, I'm going to need two tools. I'll need my MusicNomad pick capo to hold my low E string down on the first fret. So I'll take my pick capo, put it over the E string, under the A, and then over the D. And what that's going to do is just hold the low E string down on the first fret for me. I will also need my MusicNomad Truss Rod gauge. Now this is a cool, handy little gauge. It has the three most commonly used relief settings for electric guitar, acoustic guitar and bass, and classical guitar. We're going to use today the electric guitar setting, which is 6/1000 of an inch. The way we came to these measurements is, having set up thousands of guitars, we've realized that 6/1000 of an inch of relief is enough relief to allow the string to oscillate cleanly, but not so much relief that the action feels high in the middle of the neck. So having used a Plek machine for 7 years now, that is also the recommended relief measurement for 90% of the guitars that come out of the Plek. So it's a really good starting point. If you have a heavy attack, you're a really heavy hitter, maybe add another thousandths of relief. If you're a very light player, maybe you can set it a thousandths less, but it's a really good starting point, and just about any guitar plays great with these recommended relief settings. Also on your gauge here, it has a little legend for the touch rule on the use of the gauge. If you put the gauge in between the fret and the string and it does not touch, you're going to turn your truss rod nut to the right to take out relief. If it has just a little bit of touch, you're in good shape. And if it has a really heavy touch where it's moving the string out of the way, you're going to loosen your truss rod to add relief to the neck. So let's talk a little bit about how the truss rod actually operates. The truss rod is a metal bar through the neck. It has an anchor at one end and a threaded nut on the other. This guitar happens to be a headstock adjust truss rod, so it has an anchor at the body end. It's a metal rod that goes through the neck, and then the nut on the headstock end. So to measure our neck relief, I'm going to put my guitar into the playing position. I'm going to open up my truss rod gauge to 6/1000 of an inch, and I'm going to push my low E string down right at the 12th fret. Now what I'll do is I'll take my gauge and I'm going to put it between the 6th fret and the low E string. So I can tell this guitar has almost no relief just by looking at the amount of space there is. But I'll go ahead and try to put that into that, and there is no gap. It is very heavily moving the string out of the way. So looking at my legend, medium to high touch, I want to turn my truss rod nut counterclockwise to loosen it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off my truss rod cover. So I'll take my truss rod and my truss rod cover and my truss rod cover screw, put them in my little clamshell pack to keep those out of the way. So this guitar has a truss rod just like a Gibson style. It's a 5/16 inch nut. So I'm going to grab my 5/16 inch wrench from my truss rod kit. So in order to add relief to the neck, I'm going to loosen the nut. So that's looking at the nut from the headstock end. I'm going to turn it counterclockwise to add relief to the neck. So I'm just going to take this, and that's pretty tight. Go ahead and back that off, maybe just about a quarter of a turn. I'll give the neck a little flex just to seat the truss rod, make sure it's not hung up or anything. And I will now get my truss rod gauge, fret right on the 12th fret, and come in here and measure once more. That is just barely scraping the string and the fret. So I'm going to call that good. That is right at 6/1000 of an inch. So I'm going to leave it there and move on with the setup. So having now set the neck relief correctly using the truss rod gauge and a truss rod wrench, we're ready to move into the bridge. What is great about the flow of this setup process is that once we've done one adjustment, we don't have to go back and do it again. The adjustments that we're going to make are not going to impact the neck relief. So now we'll move down to the bridge, and I've measured this fretboard, and I know that it's a 12-inch radius. So using my MusicNomad radius gauge, I'm going to measure my bridge radius and see if it matches my fretboard. You want to have your bridge radius match your fretboard radius, and on this bridge we'll do it by filing the string slots in the bridge top to achieve the same radius. These are really great radius gauges. What I like about them is the black is a really good contrast off the strings, so it's really easy to see if there's any gap between the string top and the radius gauge. And there's some handy reminders on the gauge itself about where to measure, about a 1/4 inch in front of the saddle. It shows how to measure your fretboard radius, and then there's a link to the MusicNomad website. If you are having trouble measuring your fretboard radius, there's a database with all of the with many of the common fretboard radius that are used in the industry. So I'm going to take my gauge and I'm going to put it on the strings just in front of the saddle, about a 1/4 inch in front. Now, if you're having trouble seeing what is touching the gauge or not, there are a couple of tricks that will be helpful. So what I do is I look down the strings, and if you have a light colored background behind you, sometimes that's really helpful to see if there's a little gap. But I can see right now that I've got a gap between my D string in the gauge and my G in the gauge. If you're having trouble seeing that, you can bounce the gauge up and down very gently. Just set it on the strings and then just gently bounce it, and you'll see what strings are moving and what strings are not. And I can very clearly see that my E and A are moving, my D and G are not, my B is not, and my E is. So I've got my D, G, and B are too low. Lastly, you can leave the gauge on the strings, and you can pluck the strings one at a time and listen to see what's hitting and what's not. So you can hear the E is hitting, the A is hitting, the D is not, the G is not, the B barely is, and the high E is. So now I know what's touching the gauge and what isn't. So my game plan is going to be to cut the string slots in the bridge down deeper to lower the strings that are touching the gauge until I have all 6 perfectly touching. So I'll use my diamond-coated nut files to cut slots deeper in the bridge to achieve that 12-inch bridge radius. When I'm cutting bridge saddle slots, I like to turn the guitar around so that I can approach the bridge from the top side, and I cut downward at an angle towards the tailpiece. Now, it is important to maintain an angle down. You want the string to leave the bridge from the front edge of the slot. If you have a slot that is too flat or is worn over time, it can cause overtones, it can cause a sitaring sound. It could just be a buzzing or overtone on the saddle slot. So you want to cut downward at an angle. You don't want to go too steep, but you want to cut a couple of degrees down towards the back. So whenever you're selecting your files to cut your saddle slots, you want to get a file size that is the same size as the string you're cutting for, or up to 3 to 4 thousandths of an inch larger. You don't really want to go much bigger than that because it can create a slot that's too large and the string can vibrate in the slot, and again you'll have overtones or weird buzzing sounds that you don't want. Saddle slots are typically fairly forgiving because you have a lot of down pressure on the saddle. I mean, I've seen guitars come in with slots that were they're so grossly oversized, it's hard to believe that it's even playing, and they're fine. But you definitely want to try to keep them to the correct size to really maximize the tone of your guitar. So I've assembled my correct size of diamond nut files. These things are great. These are the MusicNomad files. They come in a handle with interchangeable blades. The blades are super easy to take out. The end of the handle pops off and you can interchange blades. You can use the file without the handle if you're in a tight spot, or you have maybe a bridge that has a little shelf behind it or something like that, you can use just the blade, or you can use it in the handle as well. But they cut really smoothly. They take off a good amount of material per stroke. It's not too much, but they're very even. They cut whether you're doing a saddle slot or a nut slot, they leave a very smooth finish on the bottom of the slot. So the need to sand the slot or lubricate the slot is really minimized because they just cut very smoothly. So the first thing I'm going to do, since my gauge is resting on my E and A and high E, is I'm going to cut down those 3 strings. And what that's going to do is that's going to lower the gauge down to pick up the B, G, and D strings. So I'll just pop my low E string out, and I'm going to put my file right in the saddle slot. And you can see I have a slight downward angle towards the tailpiece. I'm just going to come in here and just give it a little file right there. And I'm going to recheck. That took it down a little bit, but I need to lower it a little, and then I'm going to need to lower that A for sure. So just a little bit more on that. Yeah, now I'm rocking on the A string because now I've lowered the E, so now it's sitting on the E, the high E and the A. So now I'm going to grab my A slot. I'm just going to use this one without a handle because it's easy to go either way. You can see how simple it is to use that way too. And you don't want to go too far, just like cutting a nut slot. If you go too far, you have to then try to bring all of the other strings down. So now that has really, that's picked up the D. So now I'm on the E, the A, and the D. The G and the B are still not quite there. So I'm going to cut the high E string down, and that should rock the gauge down and pick up the G and the B. But we'll see. It might be that simple. It might not be. So I'll get that string out of the way. Oh yeah, that looks good. So now I've got E, A, D, G, B, and E. So I am hitting all 6 strings with my radius gauge. This saddle was pretty good. I mean, they're typically more out than that just on guitars in general. So this was a pretty minimal amount of work, but it came out really nice. So as you're making your game plan to cutting the strings down to make the radius correct, just remember, if it's touching the gauge, you need to cut that string slot down to lower the gauge down to the strings that are too low. So, again, if the string is not touching the gauge, do not cut that string slot. It's already too low. So just remember, sometimes what I'll do is if I have a couple of strings that are low, I just won't even get those files out. I'll only get out the files for the strings I know I have to cut. And I may end up having to adjust those slots at the end, but it will keep me from making a mistake and accidentally cutting a slot that's already too low. All right, so now we've got our bridge radius set correctly, and we're going to now use our string action gauge and measure our action height. So on the string action gauge, which is another great little gauge, this is the MusicNomad string action gauge. It is measures in both SAE and metric, your string action height. You've also got 64ths. It's got a ruler in metric and SAE on the end. It has a pickup height adjustment scale, both metric and SAE. Shows commonly used action heights for electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and bass. So if you are, don't know of a specific action height that you like, you can pick from the chart and get probably pretty close, and you can always modify from there. In addition to the chart and the SAE and metric measurements, the black background and the white lettering is extremely easy to read. I've worked with a lot of other gauges that have far less contrast between the markings and the background, and this is super easy to see. So it's been very common in my setup classes that people with some of the other brand gauges have had trouble reading them, even with really good lighting. But this thing, the white really pops on the black background, so it'll make your job of measuring this stuff a lot more easy. Okay, so what I'm going to do to measure my action height is I'm going to put the guitar in the playing position. I'm going to fret at the first fret, and then I'm going to take the side of the gauge with the graduated lines, and I'm going to put it on the fret at the 12th fret. I'm going to pick an action height that I want to use. Now this is, a jazz guitar. Typically jazz guys or gals, the action sometimes comes in pretty high, but I found that it's a good medium to medium low action is a lot easier to play, and if the fretwork is good, it just makes complicated comping and fast jazz runs a lot easier if you can get the action a little lower. So I'm going to actually choose a medium action for this guitar, which is 65 thousandths on the bass side and 55 thousandths on the treble side. And for an Archtop guitar, that's going to be a good, comfortable action. We might be able to take it a little bit lower than that, but we'll see. It's a good starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fret at the first fret. I'm going to put the gauge on the 12th fret behind the low E string. So I'm going to put my 20 thousandths line right at the 12th fret. And I can see that's well below the string. So I'm going to scoot the gauge over to the left, and I'm able to see the lines get closer and closer to the string as I move the gauge over. So as I move it over, what I'm finding is that this guitar currently is sitting right at 60 thousandths of an inch. It's sitting at 60 thousandths of an inch, which means that the string is sitting right on top of the 60 thousandths line. Now, in order to set it to 65, I'm going to raise the string up until there's a slight gap above the 60 line, but you can't see the 70 line. So that's the way the gauge works. It's in 5 thousandths of an inch increments. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to need to adjust this bridge using these thumb wheels. The way this bridge works is the bridge top sits on these thumb wheels, which are on threaded posts. And if I loosen the thumb wheel, turn it counterclockwise, the thumb wheel is going to climb up the post and raise the action. If I turn the thumb wheel clockwise, it's going to go down the post and lower the action. So I'm going to raise the action on the bass side a little bit, just to bring that up to 65. So there I've got actually I can see the 70 line a little bit, so I'm going to go down just a bit. There we go. Got just a little gap above the 60 line, but I can't see the 70 line, so that's 65. And on the bass side, or on the treble, I'm sitting at about 75, so I'm going to lower that down quite a bit. So now I brought that down, and now I'm sitting right at about 60. I'm going to bring that down just a touch more. And now I am at 55. When you're adjusting a bridge like this, whether it's a Tune-o-matic or a wooden top bridge with thumb wheels, if you're having trouble getting these to turn, you can use your spanner wrench that's in the tech screwdriver kit, and you'll be able to grab the little knurling on the thumb wheels and be able to either raise or lower the thumb wheel using the spanner. It's really handy that way. If you don't have a spanner, you can also just loosen the strings and then turn the thumb wheels up or down. So now that I've adjusted my bridge action, I'm going to tune my guitar back to pitch. So at this point, we have set our neck relief, our bridge radius, and our action height. So this is a time when you would play the guitar up and down the neck and make sure that the guitar is playing comfortably for you and all the notes are ringing cleanly for you. If this was a client's guitar, I would just play every note on the neck and make sure that they are all ringing out cleanly, and so on until I played everything. And if you are a big bender, this is the time when you would want to know, does the guitar bend cleanly? So now we're ready to cut the nut slots to the correct height. The nut is really important to the overall playability of the guitar. It governs the string spacing at the first fret. It governs intonation in the low registers. If it's cut too high, your intonation can be sharp in the low registers because as you push the string down to fret it, it's stretching it. And if it has to stretch too far, it raises the pitch and it becomes sharp in the low registers, makes all your chords sound out. It also governs tuning stability because the nut slots, if they're not cut correctly, the strings will bind in the nut slots and can ping and make it difficult to tune, and then make the guitar not stay in tune once it finally is in tune. So what we'll do is we'll first measure our nut heights, which is the gap of the string at the first fret. That's what we're going to measure, is the actual distance from the top of the first fret to the bottom of the string. And we'll measure those gaps, and then we'll cut the nut slots to achieve the correct gaps there. So the first thing that I'm going to use is my MusicNomad nut height gauge. And this is very similar to the Truss Rod gauge. It's a little feeler gauge set that is only the gauges that you need. These are the most commonly used nut heights for electric and acoustic guitar, classical guitar, and bass. And then there are also a couple of smaller ones in case you want to experiment with a little lower nut height. And there's a one that's a little bit larger in case you have, an 8-string guitar or a 5-string bass. What's really cool about this gauge is it only has the gauges that you need. It's not greasy like the ones that you buy at the hardware store if you just have an old set of feeler gauges laying around. It has marked on the blade what measurement you'll use depending on what string on what type of guitar. So on this one it has the 20 thousandths is marked for low E and A for a guitar, so that'd be an acoustic or an electric, and it's also the E and A string on a bass and a E and a G on a classical, and so forth. So I'm going to use the 20 thousandths for my low E and A, my 18 thousandths for my D and G string, and then I'm going to use the 16 thousandths on my B and E string. So as I'm using this gauge, much like the Truss Rod gauge, there's a legend on the handle showing me how to use the gauge. So what I'll do is I'll put the gauge in between the string and the fret, and if I have a touch rule here, so it shows my first fret. If I have a touch that is no touch, I will file the nut slot. So I'm going to lower the string. If I have a touch where it's touching the string and the fret, but it's not buzzing, I'm good to go. So if I've cut it too low, then I'll know because the string will be buzzing. That's really the only thing that will happen. If you go a little bit below these dimensions, you're probably going to be fine. But if you really get over aggressive and cut the slot far beyond the recommended depths, you may have open string buzz, in which case you would need to either fill your nut slot or shim the nut or have a new nut made. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the guitar in the playing position, get my 20 thousandths inch gauge, and I'm going to measure the gap between the low E string and the first fret. Now I've got a bit of a gap there, so I'm going to need to cut that down. And I'll measure the A while I'm here. And I have a gap there as well. So the E and the A are both too high. So I'm going to use the same set of files that I used for my bridge saddle slotting. And I'm going to start with my low E. Now for cutting the nut slot, I like to keep the guitar in this orientation so I can get over the top of the nut and I can file straight towards the tuner in line with the string. I'm going to have a slight downward angle, not as severe as the headstock angle, but definitely a couple of degrees so that I create a nut slot that allows the string to come in at the bottom and then take off crisply at the front of the nut so that we keep our intonation correct at the first fret. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and loosen that string up, pop it out of the nut slot, grab my file for my low E. I'm going to come in here and just give it a little file there. Now you definitely, if you haven't cut a nut before, you want to definitely slow and steady. You don't want to get in a hurry and cut so fast that you cut the slot too low before you know what happened. So you want to be easy with it, but you also do have to cut firmly enough that you do remove material. You can't just put the file in and barely do it. You've got to actually cut material. Now that I've cut the low E nut slot, I'm going to go ahead and remeasure. So that has just a very, very light touch on between the gauge and the fret. So I'm going to call that good. So now I'll move over to the A string and cut that down. And I know that it was a little bit high, so I'm going to use my file for my A. All right, so let's remeasure. That is about perfect. So I'm going to call that good. Now I'm going to drop down to my 18 thou gauge and measure my D string. So I'll push it under the A and the A. And yep, I've definitely got some clearance on that D. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that down. This nut is very peaked. It has a very small spot that the string is resting on, so it's not taking a lot of filing to bring this down to the height that I want. And that is right on the money at 18. So let's measure my G. That's actually pretty close. That is, I would call that good on that G. That is no problem. I don't need to do anything on that. And then I'm going to drop down to my 16, which is the high E and the B string. Let's measure that. Yeah, the B is very high, and the E is high also. So we'll come in and cut that B. Give that a measure. That looks really good. And yeah, don't have a lot to take off that E, but there is a little bit. And it's all about the details. The closer you can get everything, the better your guitar is going to play. So, you know, take it slow and be patient, and you'll end up with a guitar that really plays well. Yep, and that is just barely moving that string out of the way. So I am in good shape on that high E. You might have noticed on the outer E's on this guitar, I detuned before I lifted them out of the nut. Now this guitar, like a Gibson or Martin acoustic, has the headstock comes out from the nut. If you just pop the string out of the slot and drop it over, you're going to mar the lacquer on the edges of the headstock face. So on the outer E's, you definitely want to detune those so when you pull them out, they don't scratch up your headstock edge. The inner four strings, you can usually just pop them out of the slot and slide them over. This is a very hard nut. I can't tell if this is plastic or bone. It's really hard to tell, but it's not marring the top at all. If you have a graphite nut or a softer nut, if you just pull the string out and slide it around, you might scratch the top of the nut. So, down tuning a little bit is not a bad idea to pop the string out of the slot. Some guitars you don't have to, but definitely watch that lacquer edge with the outer two E strings. The main unique thing on this instrument that differentiates it from most other electric or acoustic guitars is the floating bridge. Now this bridge has, it is not pinned to the top, so it slides around. And that's how you set your intonation. You can't adjust the saddles individually, but you can slide the bridge to intonate the guitar as closely as you can. The top of the bridge is not compensated. It's basically a straight saddle, so we are going to have some compromises on our intonation. Many Archtop guitars have a compensated bridge top that allows for a closer intonation than I think this bridge is going to, but let's see. We can probably get it pretty close. We'll see when we get there. Now on a bridge with individually adjustable saddles, we would move each saddle back and forth to make each string perfect. We're not going to be able to do that on this guitar. So what we'll do is we'll just move the bridge and get as best as we can, and we'll see how we come out. Now I want to explain a little bit about intonation. Intonation is the process of making the fretted notes play in tune with the open strings. So in order to do that, we have to move the bridge, which is called compensating. So the amount of compensation varies depending on the thickness of the string, but we will have to add a little bit of length to the scale to compensate for the fact that when you push the string down, it raises the tension and raises the pitch of the fretted note. So by lengthening the scale, you compensate for that tendency. Usually the low E string is going to have the largest amount of compensation, the high E string is going to have the least amount. So this bridge starts with the E string back, and it zigzags, or it doesn't zigzag, this one just angles straight to have the high E string closest to the neck. So it's kind of compensated, but really it should be, these four should be in a line, and then the B should drop back again. So I suspect we're going to end up with the B string being sharp. But the first step is to just check our intonation and see where we are. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that all 6 of my strings are perfectly in tune. And then I'm going to fret at the 12th fret and at the 17th fret. So you can hear that this guitar is tuning very evenly. There's no pinging in the nut. There's no hanging up. It's very smooth. So that's what you want to be paying attention to. That makes not only your intonation easier, but it just makes the guitar a lot more stable generally when you're playing. Okay, so now we're perfectly in tune. And I'm going to check at the 12th fret. I'm sharp on my low E. I'm a little flat on my A, flat on my D, flat on my G, a little sharp on the B, and I'm right on the money on the high E, a little flat. So I'm going to check also my 17th. It's good on the E, pretty good on the A. Good on the G or the D, a little flat on the G string, a little sharp on the B, a little sharp on the E. Okay, so now I got to make a game plan. So where do I want to optimize the intonation? Where do I want to make it, the closest it can be? An easy way to look at it is go with the A and the B strings. Make those 2 strings perfectly. And then the other 4 are just going to kind of end up where they're going to end up. Some people do the outer E's, but I find that if you do the outer E's, the B can be a little sharp. So I'm going to intonate the A string and the B string perfectly, and then we'll see where we are on the other 4. So on my A, let's get that perfectly in tune. Okay, right on the money, a little bit flat, but it's a little bit sharp on the 17th fret. So we're already splitting the difference on the A, so we're probably going to leave that alone. So here's our B. Some guitars, if you intonate them perfectly at the 12th fret, you'll find that the upper frets can be a little bit sharp, and that's what this guitar is showing. If I'm right on the money on the 12th, the 17th is a little sharp, so I may have to make the 12th be a tiny bit flat and the 17th be just a tiny bit sharp. But the good thing or the bad thing about strobe tuners is you can see things on the tuner that you would not be able to hear. So if you can get the intonation close enough that it's just barely scrolling, you're going to be fine. If you can get it where it's just perfect, that's even better, but you'll be all right if it's just barely turning. So now let's see what we have on our B string. That looks really good. a little bit sharp, a little bit sharp. Okay, so those are both a little bit sharp, so I'm going to move the bridge back a little bit on the high E side. So some guitars, if they don't have a lot of down pressure, which this is not too terrible, you can just scoot the bridge without having to loosen the strings. So I'm just going to scoot this bridge back just a touch. I'm going to make sure. If it gives you any trouble though, just loosen the strings up. And you can even put a piece of tape on the top just a little bit away from where you have the bridge to know, okay, when my strings are loose, I want to put it in this new location. So you can sort of have a little goal for where you want the bridge to end up. Because when your strings are off, it's hard to know how much you've moved the bridge. There's our B right on the money. It's very, very good on the 12th fret. And that's really good on the 17th. Just no drift at all. So now I'm going to go back through and just double check all 6 strings, see if anything's grossly out, and then I'll play some chords up the neck and see if it, just listen for any gross intonation differences. So my E is just barely sharp. My A is right on the money. It's really good. D is a little flat, but I expected that. G. G is a tiny bit flat, nothing major. B is right on the money. And our E is also quite good. So the intonation is actually really close on this guitar, even so just playing a chord at the 12th fret, it sounds fine. If you really want to get critical about it, you can listen to your octaves on all the strings and hear if you have any beating on the octaves. Those actually sound really good. It'll be very obvious with an octave if you have intonation differences because you'll immediately hear that beating of the notes. So if that were the case on this guitar, you know, we just have to try to make an adjustment to minimize that, but you really may not have any way out if you have a non-compensated saddle top. But I'm really pleased with the way the intonation came out on this guitar. I would give this back to any customer and say you're good to go. Don't really worry about it. So it goes to show that, you know, a preconceived notion about, oh boy, we've got this non-compensated saddle top, we're not really going to be able to get it right, may not be true. You know, so no matter what your guitar is, you should always try to make it work, you know, because you might be surprised that it does. So now we've gone through the entire setup process as far as playability is concerned. We've set our neck relief, we've set our bridge radius and action height, cut our nut slots correctly, and we've intonated our bridge. So the last thing that we'll do is set our pickup heights. On page 21 of the MusicNomad setup guide, you have a chart that shows you recommended pickup heights for a variety of instruments. So this guitar has 2 humbuckers, so we're going to go ahead and use the measurements for that. That's 1/16 inch away from the strings on the bridge pickup and 3/32 away on the neck pickup. That's with the strings fretted at the last fret. So using my string action gauge, I have a small scale here on the corner for measuring my pickup height. So to measure the pickup height, I'm going to fret at the last fret, hold the string down at the last fret to get the string as close to the pickup as possible. So I'm looking for a 1/16 of an inch on the bridge pickup. I'm sitting just a little bit over a 1/16 on the bass side, and I'm sitting just a hair over on the treble. So I'm going to get a Phillips screwdriver, and I am going to raise that pickup up just a bit. All right, now That's right on at a 16th. That's right on at a 16th. And then I'm going to set my neck pickup to 3/32 away from the strings. Typically the neck pickup will have a little more output than the bridge pickup because the string oscillates in a larger arc at the neck pickup. Of course, every instrument is different, so you don't know till you do it. So that's right at a 16th, and that's right at a 16th. So I'm going to lower that down just a bit to get down to 3/32. Pushing down at that last fret, and that's right at 3/32 on the treble side. It's a little high still on the bass side. And that looks good. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my amp, just play a little bit, usually go mid-neck at first to balance the pickup height, because that's where your string height is kind of the most even between the neck pickup and the bridge pickup. So make sure that all our volumes are up and our tones are up. Bridge pickup. But that sounds very even between the two pickups. So, that just goes to show that anytime you're doing, a pickup adjustment, the specs are a good place to start, but you may have to raise or lower to compensate for some tonal quality of the pickup. If your pickup's really shrill sounding, you can lower the treble side and raise the bass side. If it's super muffled, you can raise the treble and lower the bass. So now that we've got all the playability done and the pickups adjusted correctly, I'm going to go ahead and put my truss rod cover back on. That's sort of the last step of the process. So hopefully you've enjoyed this setup video working on this Eastman Archtop. The Keep It Simple setup method in conjunction with the MusicNomad tool sets really makes setting up your guitar and maintaining it easy to do, easy to understand, and it keeps it really well organized. The methodology, hopefully you've seen that it's a very linear step-by-step process that anyone can follow. And then with the gauge kit, you can not only set up your guitar, but you can start developing your own sense of what you like as a player. So using the gauges, you can start seeing, I like this specific action height, I like this neck relief, I like these nut heights. And with the toolkits, you're able to do that on all of your guitars. So you can have a very compact set of tools to be able to cover everything that you need to do a setup on your instrument.
For detailed videos on how to use each gauge during the setup process, please visit musicnomadcare.com for all our how-to videos.